We want to take you now to Eagle Pass, Texas, where you see House Speaker Mike Johnson speaking about immigration issues at the U.S. southern border. Let's listen.
26 states, one U.S. territory. You have everybody from California to Maryland, from Michigan to Florida. We represent over half the U.S. states because every state in America is now a border state, and we've seen that on vivid display today. Today we were able to meet with local residents, with sheriffs, with the Texas DPS. We also toured the CBP processing facility here in Eagle Pass, and it's been an eye-opener. One thing is absolutely clear. America is at a breaking point with record levels of illegal immigration, and today we got a first-hand look at the damage and the chaos the border catastrophe is causing in all of our communities. The situation here and across the country is truly unconscionable. We would describe it as both heartbreaking and infuriating. Our communities are overrun. We have local resources that are being strapped. We have lethal drugs that are pouring into our country at record levels. And it's in less than 3 years that President Biden took office that this has happened. That we have over 7 million illegal encounters at the border, nearly 2 million known gotaways, and that doesn't count the many that are undetected. At 312 suspects on the terrorist watch list that have been apprehended. We have no idea how many terrorists have come into the country and set up terrorism cells across the nation. Last month alone, we saw the most illegal crossings in recorded history. It is an unmitigated disaster, a catastrophe. And what's more tragic is that it's a disaster of the president's own design. About an hour ago, we had lunch, and there are a number of sheriffs that work and serve here along the border of Texas. The sheriff of Terrell County was one of them. He was a former Border Patrol agent for 26 years, and he said in his estimation, it took less than 6 months for the Biden administration to dismantle 100 years of progress that the U.S. Border Patrol had achieved. Some of the first actions that Joe Biden took when he rolled into the Oval Office were that he rolled back border security measures. They were put in place by the Trump administration. We all saw it happen. Remember, it was on his very first day in office that President Biden stopped construction of the southern border wall, and he ended the Remain in Mexico policy. It was estimated on our tour just a moment ago that if the Biden administration would reinstate just the Remain in Mexico policy, it could stem the flow by probably 70% or more. But he refuses to do it. And since the time that President Biden took office, the administration has done next to nothing to protect the border. But we've all seen with our own eyes, they have opened the border wide to the entire world. It's estimated that nearly 170 countries have people coming in and flowing across this border. And some of these are from nations that have high numbers of concentration. And these are not people who are fleeing and looking for asylum, that are in fear for their lives in their home countries. We have hardened criminals coming across that border. They're the ones being released from prisons from some of these countries and sent here to come into the U.S. Rather than incentivizing people to come, the president needs to deter people from entering the country. Rather than discussing amnesty with Mexico, as top Biden administration officials did within the last couple of weeks, this administration should reinstate the Remain in Mexico policy, as was said. Rather than expanding parole authority to an unprecedented scale, the president should obviously end catch and release and stop the abuse of our parole and asylum systems. The president can and should act now. This doesn't require legislation. It requires leadership. And despite the White House's claim, he has all the authority he needs right now under existing federal law to stop this madness. But the message his policies have sent is the opposite of that. It's quite clear. Under President Biden, America has laid out a welcome mat to illegal immigrants, smugglers, and cartels. He is responsible for the grave threat to our national security and our nation's sovereignty that these policies have created. But instead of taking responsibility and providing leadership, this administration has done nothing but attack elected officials who are trying to fix this catastrophe. The people standing behind you have worked hard. We passed our legislation more than 7 months ago. You have red and blue states all across this country that are being forced to step up because the federal government has failed to do its job. Right here in Texas, Governor Abbott has heroically done more to enforce the law than the president has. And how has this administration responded? They have sued the state of Texas to stop their deterrence efforts. They have brought them to court to strike down their ability to put up buoys in the water and razor wire and the rest. It's absolute insanity. The House has done its job. As I mentioned, we delivered common sense legislation that will secure our border. But it's been sitting on Chuck Schumer's desk for 7 months. House Resolution 2 was our bill, and the time to act on it is yesterday. It certainly needs to happen. With each passing day, each record broken, this administration's dereliction of duty becomes more and more dangerous and more infuriating, and we are here to say that it must stop. What we saw today only made House Republicans more resolved to stand for sanity and the American people, and we will do it. If President Biden wants a supplemental spending bill focused on national security, it better begin by defending America's national security. It begins right here on our southern border. We have a few members here that will give you some more insight on what we saw today and what we anticipate. And I'll lead off next with the chairman of our Homeland Security Committee, Mark Green of Tennessee.
Chairman. I want to thank the Speaker for putting this CODEL together. Really appreciate it. Thank you for all coming. It's important to bring what's happening here to the American people, to all of the American people. I also want to thank the members who are here. You know, I first took the oath to defend the Constitution of the United States against enemies, foreign and domestic, on the plane at West Point when I was 17 years old. And for the better part of my adult life, I have spent that training and fighting foreign terrorists. And now as the chairman of the Committee on Homeland Security, I contend with the domestic threats to this nation. The greatest domestic threat to the national security and the safety of the American people is Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. Yes. He, through his policies, has defied and subverted the laws passed by the United States Congress. He has defied multiple court orders. He has lied numerous times to the United States Congress. He has, under oath, stated things that were blatantly, obviously incorrect. He has broken his oath to defend this country. Even A.G. Garland admitted that the policies of Mayorkas are being used by the cartels.
All right, a lot of fiery rhetoric directed at President Biden and Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. We've been listening, of course, to Speaker Mike Johnson, as well as other Republican House members speak at the southern border in Eagle Pass, Texas. Johnson said that America is at a breaking point with record levels of illegal immigration. The speaker called the situation heartbreaking and infuriating.
Right, and the speaker saying the purpose of this was so they could all get a first-hand look at the border crisis. But as we all know, Democrats and Republicans have been unable to come to an agreement when it comes to any type of legal reform when it comes to immigration. In fact, the speaker there, Republican speaker, saying all of this is a disaster of President Biden's own design. So a highly partisan speech there, and he spoke of hardened criminals entering the country. He said they weren't desperate people seeking asylum. The speaker called Texas Governor Greg Abbott, in fact, and his new immigration law heroic as well.
Well, joining us now is Politico White House reporter Myah Ward. Myah, thank you for joining us. So tell us, what's your take on what you heard from Speaker Johnson?
Yeah, I mean, you both summed it up really well, but a few things stood out. I mean, he started off saying every state is a border state, and I think there's some truth to that. I mean, we are seeing this political pressure from both sides, Republicans and, Democrat-led cities that are dealing with this influx of migrants. I think the other thing that you already noted, this quote, disaster, it's a disaster of the president's own design. And the reality is this is an issue that both parties have failed to solve, and it speaks to just how political the issue of immigration has become. And it's pretty easy to see how the White House is going to respond here. They're going to say, well, if you feel this way, pass the president's, supplemental funding request. It included $13.6 billion for the border. And it just left me wondering, what does this mean for a border deal? I mean, when you hear Johnson's speech today, is there any deal that those Senate negotiators could present that is going to appease House Republicans? I mean, you heard him bring up H.R. 2. he brought up presidential parole authority, which, my sources have said has been a red line for the White House. It has been a tool that the president has leaned on to manage the influx at the border. So it's just really hard after that to see a deal right now that everyone will agree to.
Yeah, and it's, for our viewers who just want the factual information out of this, it can be challenging to separate the political rhetoric from the reality on the ground. I mean, as we've spelled out here, both Republican and Democratic administrations have failed in decades past to come to an agreement to reform what is a big, messy issue. To your point, there exists right now a negotiation that both sides could make. Democrats could curtail the asylum programs. They could surge deportations. Not all Democrats support that. Republicans want more aggressive programs to be in place. So I guess this leads me to the question of, is there really an incentive in an election year for Republicans to come to a middle ground with Democrats? Or might we see more of what this new House Speaker is doing, which is what appears to be more of a political grandstanding in order to kind of appeal to their own base?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely depends on who you ask. But if you ask Democrats, that's what they believe Republicans are going to do, and that they want to keep this issue alive and to be able to lean into that in 2024. But on the flip side, there's a lot of frustration if you talk to immigration advocates, progressives, that Democrats are also not pushing enough in terms of what they could get out of this deal. You're not hearing a lot about DACA. You're not hearing a lot about work authorization, which is something that, Democrat-led cities have really pushed for, is something they feel like a tool that would really help them manage the migrants in their cities. So there's frustration, it's not even just right versus left on this issue. There is frustration, inside each party as well.
It was interesting, Myah. I wrote down that same line that you were mentioning. Every state is now a border state. The Speaker of the House really trying to make the argument that with the influx of migrants, that communities across the country are dealing with that stress in terms of resources, et cetera. But I also heard from his remarks him separating that feeling that we heard when we were talking to the mayor of Laredo about the humanitarian desire to help people in need, and really focusing on drugs, on people on the terror watch list. He called them hardened criminals. So really sort of getting rid of that idea that these are people that we should be feeling sympathetic altruism for. Is that going to be part of the Republican strategy on this? And I also want to ask you about what's happening there in Texas, because it's an important deadline in terms of a Texas law that's being worked out in the courts about allowing state officials to arrest and prosecute migrants. Tell us how this all kind of fits into the bigger picture.
Yeah, I mean, I think you should definitely expect some of that rhetoric from Republicans, but like with everything, it's not an every and all situation. You're not going to hear every Republican talk about migrants in that way. Same with Democrats. There is some nuance there. But in terms of Texas, I mean, absolutely, we should expect a political and legal showdown here. And, as you know all too well, it's not going to be the first time that we've seen this when it comes to this administration and Greg Abbott. And so it's been a trend in this, tug and pull, for the past few years between Texas and the Biden administration. So we already have a legal challenge from El Paso County, the ACLU. DOJ is also expected to sue, arguing that the new law is going to infringe on federal authority and is unconstitutional in how it allows local police to arrest suspected undocumented migrants. And I mean, it really is fascinating just how far-reaching this law is. I mean, giving state-level law enforcement the power to stop and arrest migrants on, state-level illegal entry charges. I mean, it's a big deal. And so I think it's going to be really interesting how this plays out as a state, is really trying to insert itself in federal border enforcement.
And Myah, in our last minute with you, how might the House Republican effort to impeach the DHS Secretary Mayorkas color everything that we've just spelled out?
I mean, this piece of the story is so fascinating to me. I mean, it's like all of this is coming to a head this week. I mean, we have Republicans at the border, these border talks happening in Congress. plans to move forward with the impeachment efforts against Secretary Mayorkas, who also happens to be the administration's top negotiator on these border talks. So it's just, he went on a media blitz this morning. He's also, serving as the administration's, top spokesperson, the face of this issue in many ways. And so that just adds, another complicated layer to, already complicated talks. And so I can only imagine that it's going to make this more difficult. And, it's going to add some fuel to the fire. And you're going to hear Democrats point to that as another reason that they feel that this is a political effort.
All right. Myah Ward, thank you for joining us.
Myah, thank you very much.